Chapter 3. Jonas followed Alex into the bedroom. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" he questioned as she pulled her bag from the closet and placed her few things into it. This was supposed to be a short visit, and Alex hadn't anticipated the drama that she'd found herself into. However, she should have known better. Jonas was walking drama. Wherever Jonas went, heartache, pain, and tragedy followed, and there was Alex always in the middle of it. She didn't want this, she married into it. Shouldn't Max have known this and forgave whatever had happened? Where was his understanding, for fuck's sake? Wasn't this his problem with himself and his brother that he'd handed off to her? She'd hoped that this would be different. How could it be different? Because it was Jonas Blackstone after all, and when had her life been without drama after she'd met the two of them? Alex couldn't remember. Perhaps it was the time when she'd given birth and could get some rest, being away from her wickedly handsome husband, Maximillian Blackstone, and his tragically handsome brother, Jonas. Not even then did she get her peace when he'd insisted that he and his twin brother be inside the room when she gave birth. Max wanted Jonas to know that he was a part of his family, and nothing would destroy that bond. Nothing but Max himself, Alex thought. After tossing into the suitcase the few clothes she'd brought with her, she turned to see Jonas leave. She had a black dress, a black pantsuit, white blouse, 2 pairs of black shoes, and a light-colored blue dress for the wedding. There was nothing else. Maybe if she'd packed her whip and crop, used it on Max, she'd gotten a better response out of him. It took that and more to get him to sleep when she first met him. That's where she'd made a mistake. If she'd done that, he'd be sleeping by now, and she'd be cooking him breakfast and telling him how much she loved him, and he'd be doing the same over coffee and breakfast. When Jonas left after she was packing, he finally strolled back into the bedroom after she'd hurriedly showered and dressed and was ready to leave. Alex glanced into the mirror to see Jonas towering over her. With sad eyes, she made the announcement. "I'm leaving here, Jonas, and if you're smart you should leave too. Get out of Florida. The policeman said you weren't a suspect, but they suggested that you should get out of the area now, because they didn't want you here." "But where are you going?" Jonas said, his voice low, tears pooling in his eyes like a lost child that's been searching around for their mother and can't find her. "Maybe home. I started out in New York, and I'm going back. Maybe not Manhattan, but I'm going home." After looking into Jonas's eyes and seeing how lost he was without Max, she decided it was only right that they stay together, if to do nothing else, but to give each other comfort. Without Maximillian Blackstone, they were lost. Well, one of them. Alex was sure that she'd be all right. She'd fought Max once for her son, and this time she wouldn't capitulate to him. She'd made up her mind she'd had enough. She hadn't chosen to be saddled with 2 outrageously dangerous men. Dangerous in their own right. Max was dangerous because of his power and money. Jonas was dangerous because he was a loose cannon who attracted trouble. Odd, sexy, beautiful women like iron to a magnet. Yet Alex felt responsible for Jonas in a sick, possessive way. "You can come with me, and we can sort this out, or you can stay here, let your pain and memories catch up with you or the police, because sooner than later, they will be back and asking questions about New York. In New York, we can fade into the woodwork like so many people do. That's up to you, because we don't have Max to depend on. We only have each other, and as much as I want to be rid of a Blackstone now, all I have is you, Jonas." Alex placed her hands along his stubble jawline, and he closed his eyes and leaned into her palm. "I know why Max left early, and that was to get a head start to take my children and whatever else he'd planned. I really don't want to talk about it now. If you're coming, Jonas, pack a few things and leave the rest here for the next tenants to clean out. Don't leave any papers leading back to you. They were out of Jonas's rental in an hour, and waiting for a flight at the airport to New York. And then Alex realized that Jonas had a car. What did you do with your car? I told my friend that he could use it, but he had to get it out of the garage within an hour. How do you know he'll do that? He just texted me and said he had it. Jonas sucked in a hard breath and walked on the plane with Alex. After relaxing in their seats, Jonas said, "What do we do now?" "Get that car out of your name and into your friend's, and give it to him. Get a hotel until we can lease an apartment." "I mean, what about Max? What are we going to do?" "We're going to take Max on." "Do you think that's a good idea, Alex?" Jonas questioned. "Do you have a better one?" "Well, let's hear it." "He accused you of falling in love with me, and that I was complicit in that too. And now he's out to take my children from me. What do you want me to do?" "I don't want to fight him, but he left me no choice. He thinks that he doesn't need me anymore, and he certainly doesn't need you. You did all his dirty work by posing as him for years, so he could grow an empire. I wouldn't be surprised if that cold-hearted bastard take our money too." "Do you think he'd do that?" "Max isn't like that," Jonas added, as if he'd been surprised at that statement by Alex. "Yes. He'd do anything to dominate me and you. But I have money that he can't touch. It's my mother's inheritance, and if he were smart, which I know he is, he'd put a hold on the money I have in my bank account that he gave me when we were married. But I want to know just how far he'd go. That's why when I take him to court and ruin him, he won't have a penny left." "You wouldn't do that, would you, Alex?" Alex glanced over at Jonas and raised an eyebrow. She was planning on much more than just taking his empire from him. She had other plans for Max because she knew his weakness, and she would exploit them to the fullest. What she had in mind would be hard limits. When Alex laid back in her seat, she closed her eyes as Jonas glanced over at her. He'd never seen such a beautiful woman. When he'd first met her, she was naive and young and had never met men like him and his brother. Just out of college and in love, Alex fought Max every inch to be with him, and for him to know that she was in love with only him, and she would never hurt him. It was a tall task to bring him around, and for Max to ask her to marry him, but she did, and then she made the mistake of trying to help his brother Jonas out, to save their marriage and bring the peace they both craved, and that's when their marriage took a turn for the worse. Instead of creating a bond between Max, Alex, and Jonas, it tore them apart, with Max believing that Alex loved Jonas more than him. That's what triggered Max's anger, to think that his beautiful loving wife, Alexander Blackstone, desired another man over him, even if they were twins and Jonas was his devoted brother, and no one could tell them apart except maybe Alex. In Max's mind, that idea of deceit had been solidified, and he thought he knew the truth about his brother and Alex by the spectacle at Jonas's home on his wedding night. Instead of finding Jonas in bed with his wife, Max found Jonas in bed with his wife, Alex. Jealousy overtook him, and he couldn't see or understand anything that Alex had said. His only answer was to fuck her, take her hard, dominate her, and that's what he did. When he looked over at Alex sleeping naked peacefully next to him, and he thought that another man, his brother, had taken what belonged to him, Max stepped to the floor, took one last look at the woman who had controlled his mind and body, whom he'd loved above all others. He dressed, and in his mind he walked out of her life and his brother's for good. Chapter 4. Alex and Jonas arrived in Manhattan in the middle of a heat wave, which wasn't unusual for what New Yorkers called a false spring. Is that all you've brought with you, Jonas? Alex said, her eyes taking stock of Jonas for the first time as she glanced down at his feet and on them flip-flops. Jonas glanced down to see why Alex had furrowed her brow and aimed a disapproving glance his way. They are expensive flip-flops, and this is an original hand-painted t-shirt, he uttered as they strode up to the security desk. Jonas glanced over at her. You said to leave some stuff, and I thought I could buy something later. Besides, I didn't have much in the way of clothing, except for a few cargo shorts and t-shirts. Miami, remember. The rest I left because of the memories. I'm trying to start anew in New York. No more bondage clubs, and well, you know. Do I have to spell it out? Jonas whispered, looking around to see if anyone had heard his conversation. My name is Mrs. Alexander Blackstone, and I called earlier and stated that would be occupying my apartment for an indefinite time. I'd like to have my key now. Alex placed her identification in front of them. A passport and driver's license. One security guard reached and glanced at the papers. You can't use a Montana driver's license for identification in New York. You can drive a car here until you get your New York license, but I'm afraid that's all. Alex is here to pick up her keys to her apartment, not to get a lecture on the rules of the road, Jonas barked. And who are you? One security guard who looked as though he'd never gone to a gym in his life, but spent his entire days ordering out for breakfast, dinner, and lunch, met Jonas's angry eyes. Jonas had been through too much to give a fuck anymore. Never mind who I am. Who the fuck are you to question Mrs. Blackstone? I demand that you give her the keys so we can get on with our lives. The security guard, who appeared to be playing the good cop, turned to Alex and said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackstone, but the apartment had been sold yesterday. Alex's eyes quirked up. By whom? Who sold my apartment? Good cop fumbled through the papers in front of him and looked up, meeting Alex's concerned eyes. It seems your husband, Maximillian Blackstone, sold it to the new occupants. From what I heard from them, they had been trying to buy it, and finally the deal came through. Alex turned and locked worried eyes with Jonas's. It was Alex who told Max to sell everything, but he'd kept that apartment for her if she'd wanted to stay in Manhattan a few days for shopping trips, or as a place to get away from everything if she felt isolated in Montana. And today was that day, but she hadn't fathomed that it would be under these circumstances. Alex turned in a daze, forgetting about Jonas, who was still arguing with the security officer, and now his superior. When Alex reached the glass door and the doorman opened it, she realized that Jonas wasn't behind her, so she turned and yelled, Jonas, please. You're wasting your time and ours. In which case Jonas walked away, still turning to look back at the guards. Standing outside with a backpack over his shoulder and holding on to Alex's suitcase, Jonas stepped to the curb, raised his hand, and a cab drove up. After Jonas opened the door, Alex slid into the back. When Jonas was inside, he said, Take us to the Millennium Blackstone Hotel. No. Don't, Alex said, leaning forward. A Marriott. Which one? The cabbie asked. I don't care as long as it isn't a Blackstone. When she settled back, Alex looked at Jonas. Do you have any cash? Not enough. I sunk all my available funds into that bar, and that car I had to give away. Max controls whatever money I have left, and I'm sure it would be a waste of time to expect him to place that into my bank account. What is he doing, Jonas? Trying to punish us for being deceitful cheaters, something he'd imagined. He will not stop until he destroys one or both of us. That will never happen. Alex crossed her arms in defiance. I'm going to fight him. He's trying to take everything from me and you, and all of the love I had for him. I'd been in love with him from the moment I laid eyes on his handsome face. And I'd been honest with him, and he does this to me." Alex murmured. "It's who he is, Alex. He sees everyone, including you and me, as the enemy now. He will do whatever he can to bring both of us down, even destroy us, because he thinks we love each other more than we love him." "You and I know that's not true," Alex replied, wondering if there was something to that notion. She quickly dismissed it. It could have been true if she hadn't met and married Max. He had been all she'd ever wanted in life, and now for him to do this to her, without a discussion between the three of them. If Max didn't want to include Jonas in a family discussion or a family therapy session, then he should have at least talked to her, but he said nothing and left the bed after ravaging her body all night while she voluntarily submitted to him. Alex had been his dom, and instead of her punishing him for his talk about her and Jonas, she submitted because she thought that he needed a release. That had been a mistake. "We know that there is nothing between us, but Max doesn't," Jonas added. Then Alex placed her palm over Jonas's as the cab came to a stop. Alex reached, opened her purse, and pulled out her credit card. She swiped it and it came back as unauthorized, and after several tries the card still wouldn't go through. "Lady, you have to pay with cash or I have to refer this to the cop over there. Besides, I don't have all day," the cabbie barked. "I have cash." Alex pulled out a 20 from her purse and handed it to him. Alex rarely carried cash, and she had only a couple of $100 left. She had to get money or find the credit cards that Max had no access to. However, those were in her purse and safe at home, or the home she and Max had shared together. Jonas stepped out of the cab in front of the hotel as she searched around for a credit card she thought Max hadn't known about. Finally, Alex found one. This was the very first card she had gotten in college, and thank God she used it on occasion and didn't cut it up after paying it off. "I have a card," she said to Jonas with a look of relief washing across her face. Jonas had nothing to offer Alex at this time. He'd sunk all his money into a bar and buying the building, and his wife had said she needed extra money to send to her family. Jonas eagerly sent it to them without question. After paying the cabbie and checking into the hotel, Jonas and Alex were able to get a room. They stepped into the elevator with Jonas carrying their few things, got off on the top floor, and stood in front of double doors. When Jonas opened the door, he said, "You didn't have to get a suite. And one like this?" "We can't afford it," he gasped on opening the door. It had been a long time since she heard that she couldn't afford something. It brought back painful memories of her past. Memories where she'd been homeless after her mother gave her up for adoption, and she didn't want to remain with a foster family. She'd run away as a teen, and by accident learned that her college had been paid for. Alex didn't want to revisit those memories where she was struggling, unhappy, and worried about money all the time when she'd lived in Brooklyn. Money had been scarce when she tried to complete her education while buying food, paying rent, tuition, and trying to keep her grade point average up. She had to do something, and quick. When Jonas dropped his backpack and Alex's rolling suitcase in the foyer, he watched her as she walked into the large room and stood looking out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline. Turning around, she spotted Jonas pacing on the terrace and mumbling loudly to himself. "I've fucked up so much, and finally I've fucked you," Alex cut him off. She placed her hand on his shoulder and then around his waist as she leaned her face on his back and placed a warm kiss. He craned his head to the side to see her. And that's when she saw such a hopeless look in Jonas's eyes. Alex had seen that look before when a woman died in one of his clubs. She'd just witnessed it when his wife had her throat cut by her lover, leaving her lying beside him naked in a pool of her warm blood while he slept in a drunken state from too much celebration. "No, you haven't," she added, when Jonas turned to face her. "You haven't fucked me yet," she joked, and passed her hand across his 5 o'clock shadow. "Jonas, it's going to be all right. I have some money, and we're going to be okay. Please believe me. I'm going to call my lawyer, so get the bags and find our bedrooms, drop them in there, take a shave and shower, and by the time you get out, I'll have some money wired into my account." Like a little boy following his mother's direction, Jonas smiled and did as Alex asked. Alex sauntered to one of the large L sofas, sat and pulled her phone out of her bag. "Graylin, this is Alex Blackstone." "I recognized your voice, Mrs. Blackstone. How can I help you?" "I'll need some money from my estate, and I need it ASAP. Can you get me something soon? Today?" "I understand the circumstance with your husband filing for divorce, and cutting you off from everything he owns, and taking a full page spread out in a major newspapers. Normally I'd say yes, but all your money is tied up. You'll have to forfeit your profits if you were to take it. As your business manager." Alex sat in disbelief. "I thought I heard you say that Max had filed for divorce and he took out ads." Alex shuddered, doubting what she'd just heard from her business manager about Max. However, she expected something, but not this. She didn't think that he would do something that heartless and cruel. She doubted that he would take her children, yet he'd attempted that with their firstborn. She thought that once Max got his head on straight and calmed down, that he would know that she'd never been unfaithful to him with Jonas or anyone. And yet he had time to think, and still he carried out these mean and unscrupulous plans. "Yes, Mrs. Blackstone. That's exactly what he did. Haven't you read the papers? What with the airplane accident, maybe he isn't thinking as clearly as he should. I think you should talk to him." Alex's emotions filled what little space she had left to care about Max. Alex knew there was no talking to Max, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Jonas had been right about him. Max had gone on a mission to burn down, destroy and abolish everything that they had together, and so far he'd succeeded, because now it would take a lot to keep Alex from fighting him where one wouldn't survive this, and she hoped after everything was over that she would be standing because she had children to raise who were waiting for their mother to come home and back to them. What kind of heartless bastard had Maximillian Blackstone turned into? What kind of man would not respect the rights of a wife and a mother? She'd known all along, and she realized he'd been that kind of man before. He and Jonas had been raised by servants and strangers when their mother and father would leave them for years to go off on their trips around the world. His father on business trips, and his mother to get away from the father, where her excuse was that she'd go to Paris and Milan to shop. Alex recalled Max telling her about the times alone with just him and Jonas, and he'd always taken care of Jonas because all they had were each other. Now he'd abandoned Jonas and her, like his parents had done to them. However, later their parents and extended family died in a plane crash, leaving only Jonas and Maximilian alone with only a fortune to keep them company and bring them unthinkable problems.